My name is Ranger Davis. I'm from Estes Park, Colorado. This isn't a story I ever thought I'd share, and to be honest, I wish I didn't have to. But I can't keep it to myself anymore. Because once you hear what happened, you'll understand why I can't go back up there, why I left everything behind. I bought the cabin last year, high in the forest, 30 miles from the nearest paved road, tucked into a ridge where the sky opens wide and the silence feels endless. That was the point. I wanted out, away from the lights, the voices, the constant pull of work and traffic and bills. I needed a place where I could finally breathe. A cabin with no neighbors for 20 miles felt like freedom itself. The first time I saw it, it felt perfect. Hand-hewn logs dark with age, a stone chimney rising into the pines, windows that looked out over a basin of trees, green and endless, broken only by the glint of a stream far below. Inside, the smell of cedar and dust, the echo of footsteps on wide wooden floors. A fireplace that begged for a fire, and a porch that begged for mornings of coffee in the cold. It was simple, honest, solid. I thought, this is safety, this is mine. And for a while it was. My first nights there were bliss. I cut wood, I built fires. I listened to coyotes sing to the moon and owls cry across the valley. I read by lamplight, wrote in silence, and slept so deeply I forgot the world I'd left behind. Even the creaks of the cabin seemed comforting, like the house itself was breathing, alive but steady. But there's a moment I keep replaying in my head, a detail so small I almost ignored it. I should have paid attention. I should have left. It was past midnight, one of those windless nights when the forest feels held in place, frozen. I was half asleep when I heard it. Soft, steady, almost like footsteps. Not close, not on the porch, but somewhere in the trees, far enough to question if I'd imagined it, close enough to keep me awake. Snow crust shifting, pine cones rolling. I sat up, stared at the window, and told myself, wind, just the wind. The second night it came again, this time a scratching at the door. My breath caught in my chest. I told myself the wood was settling, that old beams sometimes pop. I didn't believe it, but I forced myself to. The next night it happened again. Same time, same wall, 3 knocks, solid, cold, waiting. I rose from bed, careful not to make a sound, and grabbed my flashlight. My boots were silent on the boards as I crept down the hall, the beam of light trembling with my hand. I pressed my palm against the wood where the sound had come. The wall was icy, colder than the air around it. No cracks, no holes, no explanation. Just the memory of those knocks, echoing through my bones. And then, behind me, on the porch, a creak. The sound of weight shifting on old wood. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze, afraid to turn, afraid to look. My ears strained, waiting. Then the latch on the front door rattled, once, twice, then silence. I whispered into the dark, my voice shaking. "Who's there?" Nothing. The only answer was the wind beginning to rise, brushing cold against the windows, as if the forest itself wanted to cover what was standing on my porch. That was the moment I realized, whatever this place was, whatever I thought it offered me, safety wasn't part of it. The cabin was never mine, and the thing that knocked, it wasn't trying to come in. It was trying to see if I'd answer. It didn't stop after that night. The knocking came back, every night, always the same time, 2:17 a.m., like a clock that never failed. Sometimes it was the wall beside my bed, sometimes the front door. Once it was above me, on the roof. 3 slow knocks, like something crouching on the shingles, waiting. Each time I went outside, I searched. I checked every inch of snow around the cabin. Untouched. Perfect. No footprints. No sign of anything having passed, not even the tracks of deer or raccoon. Just silence, broken only by the pounding of my heart. The knocks didn't care. They kept coming, steadier, louder. One morning, after a sleepless night, I walked the outside perimeter of the cabin, desperate for answers. That's when I found them. Long, deep gouges in the logs. Not scratches from branches, not bear claws. They were cut deep into the wood, almost carved. Parallel grooves, reaching high above the doorframe, higher than I could stretch standing on my toes. Whatever had made them had done it far above human height. I traced the marks with my fingertips, the edges rough and splintered. My stomach twisted. I stepped back and stared at them, the morning light glancing off the raw wood. It wasn't a pattern I recognized, and it wasn't something I could explain away. That night I made a decision. I set up my old cassette recorder, the kind with the big red button, by the wall where the knocks usually came. I told myself, if I can capture it, if I can prove it, then maybe I'll finally believe it's real. At 2:17 it came again, 3 knocks, right on cue. When I played the tape back the next morning, the sound chilled me to the core. The knocks were there, clear and heavy, but in between them, under the hiss of static, something else. Breathing. Slow, ragged breaths. Not mine, not from inside the cabin. Breathing that seemed to come from right behind the wood. I replayed it over and over until I couldn't listen anymore. I told myself it had to be distortion, a glitch in the tape, but I knew it wasn't. The next night I didn't sleep. I sat up in bed, flashlight in hand, staring at the wall. The hour crept closer. I waited for the knocks, but what I heard was... One night, I pressed my hand flat against the wood where they always struck. I told myself I needed to feel it, to prove it was real. The air was still. My palm lay flat. I held my breath. Then it came. 3 knocks. And this time, I felt it. The wood shuddered under my skin. The vibration traveled up my arm into my chest. It wasn't from outside. It wasn't from the porch or the roof. It was from inside the wall itself. The knocking didn't stop. It only grew bolder. One morning, after another night of waiting, I woke to a sight that twisted my stomach into knots. Every cabinet door in the cabin stood wide open. The plates, cups, and cans of food, everything was exposed, as if someone had walked through in the night, inspecting, searching. I hadn't heard a sound. I hadn't moved, but all of it, wide open. I staggered from the bed, trying to steady myself, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Bare, muddy prints leading from the front door straight to my bed. Small, human-shaped. But the door was locked from the inside. I checked twice. I knew I had bolted it. And yet, there they were. Wet, dark smudges pressed into the old floorboards. Prints that led to me, to where I had been sleeping. Then, back out again. I followed them, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. They ended at the locked door. I rattled it. Still bolted, still sealed. No way in, no way out. But the prints didn't lie. Something had been standing over me as I slept. Faint tapping begins behind the narration. Subtle, irregular, growing. I nailed the windows shut the next day. Heavy boards across the frames. I stacked furniture against the doors. I told myself, this is it. If it wants in, it'll have to break through me. I thought I could trap it out. But that night, the knocks didn't come from the walls. They didn't come from the roof. They came from beneath me. Muffled thumps echo as though under the floorboards. 3 knocks, solid, direct, from under the floor beneath my bed. I dropped to my knees, heart pounding, ear pressed against the wood. Another 3 knocks, closer, almost like it was moving, crawling. I grabbed, not from the walls, not from the floor, from the bedroom closet. My chest clenched. I raised the gun, inching closer, every nerve in my body burning. I grabbed the handle, pulled it open. Nothing. Empty. The closet yawned back at me, filled with only shadows and my old jacket hanging limp. I exhaled, relief flooding me. My hand lowered. Then the door slammed shut, from the inside. I tore the closet open with hands that had stopped being steady a long time ago. The hangers fell. The jacket slid to the floor, and behind the plaster I found a seam, thin, deliberate. I pried at it until my fingers bled, and the wall gave with a sound like old wood sighing. Inside the crawl space, the air was sour, tasting of earth and old smoke. My flashlight carved a narrow cone through the dark, and there, cramped into that little hollow, were carvings. Names scratched deep into the bare studs. Dates. Symbols that weren't like anything I'd seen before. And words, lines written over and over in a careful, cramped hand. The script wasn't English. The letters curved and hooked, the marks the way you find on bark where something wanted to be remembered. Someone had written warnings there in Cherokee. I don't speak Cherokee, but I held the scrap of paper I'd found earlier from under the hearth and matched the shapes until the translation came to me, the meaning hard and blunt, like a stone. The words repeated, "Don't answer the knock." I read that line until the letters blurred. I read it until the walls seemed to close around me. Each carving looked old, different hands layered over one another, as if the same warning had been left by different people over generations. Someone had written it in anger. Someone else had written it trembling. Someone had written it and then carved a second line under it, this time the letters jagged. "Don't answer the knock," as though whoever had written that had come too close to forgetting the shape of fear and needed to be reminded. I sat there in the crawl space, and for the first time the pattern fell into place. The knocks I'd been trying to pin to wind or some animal. What if they had never wanted to get in? What if they had been inviting me to speak back? Not to let them in, but to let them shape me. To force my voice into the grain of the wood. The warning on the studs was plain. The danger was not the thing outside. It was the thing that wanted my reply. That realization should have been enough to make me leave that very night. Instead, it only made my skin taut and my mind click into angles of things I could not unsee. I thought of the nights my name had been whispered back to me, of the breath on the tape between the knocks, of the fingers that retreated when light. If you're hearing this and you want the raw recordings, the hidden footage, the boards I pulled, if you want to see what I found with your own eyes, then subscribe to MindFuel. They're hosting the uncut files. You'll get every tape, every creak, every moment I almost didn't record. I say that not as an advertisement, though it is, but because you need to know the shape of the evidence to understand how careful you must be. Don't just take my word, listen to the tapes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I nailed the closet shut as best I could, but nailing wood over wood isn't the same as nailing down the truth. The house settled, and so did my fear. I counted the hours until 2:17 a.m. like a condemned man counts breaths. I listened to the clock, felt time moving toward that point with a terrible precision. When it struck, the knocking began in a way I'd never heard before. The whole cabin shuddered, walls trembling, ceiling vines of plaster creaking and cracking, the floorboards humming like a throat. The knocks were violent, a hammering that ran along the beams as if something inside the structure itself had learned to pound. It was not polite now. It was not patient. The rhythm stuttered, broke, then hammered again with a force that made dust fall from the rafters. My body moved on its own. The years of fear and the new knowledge braided together, and something in me snapped. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the vanity of thinking I could still control a voice that had already mimicked mine. Whatever the reason, I stood up and went to the wall. I put my hand to the wood where the knocks had been coming from for weeks. I felt the vibration travel through my palm, into the bones of my wrist, and then I knocked back. 3 deliberate knocks. Mine. Loud, hollow returns into the cabin. My own sound echoed and then hung in the air like an answered prayer. For a second, one terrible, suspended second, everything stopped. The knocking ceased. The house took a breath. The silence was so complete I could hear the blood in my ears. Then, in my exact voice, from the inside of the walls, it breathed my name and said one single word. Finally. Hearing your own voice said back in the same tone by something that isn't you changes the way ownership feels. For a moment, the boundary that had been there, between me and the outside world, between my skin and the wood, felt thinner, like a film that could be blinked through. More than that, I felt suddenly and unbearably like I was the one inside the wall now. The thought lodged itself in my chest. The wood had accepted me. My voice had been grafted into it. I could feel the press of it, like being folded between pages and left in a book. I want you to hear the truth of what I learned. The knocks were never a door to be opened. They were a question, and when you answer, you become part of what answers back. It latches onto the cadence of your voice and wears it like a skin. When I heard finally in my own tone, it wasn't relief I heard. It was completion. It meant the thing had the sound it needed. If you ever find yourself awake at night, listening, if you ever hear the slow, deliberate taps that line up with a clock, don't imagine you are being tested by loneliness or fear. Don't imagine that by shouting you'll scare it away. Don't imagine the opposite either, that silence will starve it. The carvings warned what my textbooks and my logic didn't. The worst mistake is to answer. I don't know if I am telling this into a recorder for anyone's salvation or for my own. Maybe I'm trying to trap my voice on tape so that I can hear the difference between the man I was and the sound that now lives in the wood. Maybe I'm trying to prove to myself that I am still separate, that my words have not all been filed away into grain and shadow. The last thing I can tell you, the clearest thing of all, is this. If you hear knocking at night, don't answer. Because once you do, you'll never